Scariest thing I might add to RLCraft. Not clickbait. If this screenshot scares you, don't worry, it scares me too. I feel like this is going to be such a 50-50 split on those who like this and those who really don't. I'm going to explain. I will explain that screenshot. It is a very terrifying looking screenshot. Believe me, I'm scared. But it is something I technically talked about and asked for, and now it is a reality. Sun God, you might be on to something. Oh boy. All right. Okay. A long time ago, I had an idea to make different weapons do different types of damage. And I thought this would be a fun way to add another layer of balance to weapons. Maybe not go too complicated with it, but you know, like swords, right, would deal slashing damage. You know, maces and hammers would deal blunt damage. Spears and pikes and lances would deal piercing damage. And then we would go through and specify mobs of like, what are they more resistant to? What are they more vulnerable to? Like a skeleton. Piercing damage not going to work so well on a skeleton because they're just bones. There's no skin there. What are you piercing, right? Poke them with a spear and it just kind of like goes through their rib cage. But maybe they're weaker to blunt. Smack them with a hammer, shatter their bones. It'd be kind of like a cool layer, right? Well, we found a mod that does this and beyond. Okay? Right now, it is set on the defaults. And this is actually such an incredibly well-written mod that I am surprised it is not more popular. It supports weapons, mobs, shields, armors. It actually has Lycanite support by default, which is really funny. But it's straight up D&D. Like, the defaults are straight up D&D. Baldur's Gate 3 here. The Reaper. Whoa, what's that? It's 80% weaker to any radiant damage. But it's resistant to bludgeoning, piercing, slashing, thunder, necrotic, and force resistance, immune to force. The defaults for like the swords, a wooden sword now does 50% bludgeoning and 50% slashing. The stone sword is just straight bludgeoning. The diamond is straight slashing, and iron is 20% piercing, 80% slashing. I can change all this, obviously, but it gives you an idea. Armors, chainmail. It's good against bludgeoning and a little bit slashing, but it doesn't even protect against pierce. Piercing's not even in here. What do arrows do? Arrows do pierce. Chainmail is worn early game. What are you fighting early game? Skeletons. Skeleton arrows would go right through your chainmail with these default settings. Right? So there's obviously some things I would probably like to tweak to not piss off the entire player base. But I feel like what I worry about is this being like way too complicated for a silly block game by forcing players essentially to start doing algebra here to figure out the best combos for, like, it's a cool idea, but there's a part of me that's very worried this would just be a lot of work in just terms of balancing everything. But there's some really cool aspects I like about it. For example, like it supports like poison damage, right? So for example, the Geonok, right, is immune to poison. And that kind of makes sense. It's an elemental rock creature. How are you poisoning an elemental rock creature? So you can't just poison it anymore. This would also be kind of a good balance for like the poison stone bauble, which is a bit OP. Now, there is a slight issue at the moment where the mob will still get poisoned, but not actually take any damage, which means poison stone is still making your weapon do more damage because it thinks it's poison. So we'd have to kind of integrate something where it's like, if it's 100% poison resistance, then it just can't even get poisoned in the first place. This is something I was testing. So we have a Geonok, I have a poison potion, I throw it on the guy, and it looks like he's being hit, but you look at his health bar, his health is not going down because he's immune to poison. Okay, cool. So this would add a pretty cool layer to things. But again, the worry is it still gonna feel like RLCraft? Is this getting overcomplicated? A lot of the projectiles from Lycanite have their own whatever. Like the Feybolt charge is 50% necrotic and radiant. Again, I can change these. It's not set in stone. The Reaper projectile, though, it's 50% force and psychic damage, which means you could be an endgame player, have max armor and resistances, and this would bypass all of it. And I don't think that's a good thing. Really, there's a very big part of RLCraft that where people like to just get super OP and just kind of like lollygag their way through the early game mobs and not really have to worry about it. So at the same time, it could still be a cool way to make things challenging even at endgame. So I can see it going both ways. It's really funny. It's psychic damage. But you know what I mean? Like, the ideas are cool, but I just worry about, like, losing a bit of RLCraft's identity. Yeah, I tested it with some things. Like, I can't even, like, hurt a Geonok at the moment. If I get a diamond sword here and then, like, summon a Geonok. Again, this is just because of the defaults. So it's like... You can see I ain't doing shit to it. I'll go in, like, survival. What's cool is you see these little extra, there's a sound effect and like little shields that pop up letting you know like, hey, it's resistant to what you're attacking it with, which I think is good. You know what I mean? Because that is some visual indicator for the more casual player. They don't have to like try hard look at numbers. You have a visual representation in the game. So I think that is a good thing. Anyway, so all right, so thoughts. What are the thoughts so far on stuff like this?
I think if the values are just very simplified, it won't be as much of an issue, because if people don't want to do math, they don't have to, but people will always choose to do math.
Yeah, it'd be cool to hit kind of like a middle ground where it's like the people who don't want to worry about this stuff don't really have to. It could just kind of like make sense, kind of like what I said before. You're using a hammer against a skeleton, it's going to do a little more. It's doing blunt damage and the skeleton's weak to blunt. You know, something straightforward, something that visibly, I would say, makes sense. The other issue is balancing this around Lycanite's thing already that he has set up. Like, Geonoks already are resistant to most things, and specifically weaker to pickaxes, because that's how Lycanite had it set up. So we would be adding on to an already sort of semi-existing system. So we'd have to kind of work around that a bit. There's a lot of things I could get rid of here. We don't have to use the Force and Necrotic and Radiant and cold. There's a cold damage type, right? But at the same time, it would be cool to add elemental things, right? To once you get like the iced dragon bone swords and stuff, maybe part of their damage is actually cold damage, and then it'd be more powerful against lava enemies. You know,
I think
that's a thing. That could be cool.
I think cold, fire, lightning makes sense.
Cold, fire, lightning, poison. They do have poison as well.
Radiant, necrotic, and poison.
Because, again, so remember, this is set up in its own sort of, like, self-contained bubble. I could tell the diamond sword to be 100% poison damage. That does not mean it poisons enemy. They're not going to get poisoned, like the poison potion effect. It just means that it's specifying this damage is poison damage, and then looking at that mob and going, is it resistant or weak to that? And then changing the values of damage you do based on that.
Force, thunder, and psychic might be a bit too niche.
I would agree, unless we incorporate those things with Electroblob's wizardry.
Right.
Because now it would really work with the spells and stuff, and then we just straight up become D&D, and we've just made Baldur's Gate.
Realistically, it's like Thunder and Psychic, very few things are gonna like do that already in RLCraft.
Yeah.
And Force is just magical bludgeoning, which you could just replace anything that has Force with bludgeoning. But then like, if we add Electroblobs, then add those damage types after people are already used to the system.
That's kind of the thing, is like, this would be a nice way to balance Electroblobs, because we could use the magical damage types, you know, necrotic and force and whatever else, and define certain spells that do these certain damage types. Again, the worry is these things becoming overly complicated. I want this to feel natural, and I want to be able to open up the Lycanite bestiary, look at a creature, and have it show the damage that it does and the resistances that it has right in the bestiary. It's a matter of like integrating everything in a way that works and makes sense. I would also say if we set the elemental damage type of like fire, for example, and I did this where I took a spider as a test and I gave it 100% fire resistance, right? It also has a starting immunity of poison. Oh, and yeah, look, there's an adaptability thing. They adapt like parasites to the damage you do. I will probably disable that entirely. That doesn't make sense. I'm not doing that. That is not going to happen. But anyway, here's one of the problems I have. I have made the spider 100% resistant to fire. If I set it on fire, it still acts like it's on fire, but doesn't take damage. Same with poison. I can make something poison resist or immune, but it still acts like it's poison. And this means it's going to proc with enchantments like Ash Destroyer because it sees that the mob is on fire. So I would also want to add on to this by making it so that if it's already fire immune, don't let it be able to get set on fire. If it's already poison immune, don't let it be able to get the poison potion effect. Things like that. I would like to integrate it so it all makes sense. And this would also be a good way to balance some of the things like Ash Destroyer being OP, the Poison Stone being OP. I mean, we've known these have been OP for a while now because anything in Minecraft just can get poison. Yeah, thoughts though. Sorry, I need to read the chat because I haven't been reading everything. So give me a second. Player would also need some sort of buff, so I think it was to get super harsh. I would try to balance it around default player. And the armors too, because we can set resistances for armors. Maybe Neptunium has like natural radiant resistance or something. I don't know. Like we could do kind of anything with this, right? But I don't really want to have like 10 weapons on me for different mobs. I feel that, and this is why I would like try to simplify it. Again, Spartan already does a little bit of this where it's like, we tried to make each weapon balanced and niche and have their own use. You have the sweeping stuff for the rapier, and the other one, I think the katana, right, that do if they don't have armor, then they do a little bonus damage. You have armor piercing ones that do extra knockback, the mace doing undead damage. The one thing I have an issue with is the necrotic damage, because it's like we have both that and undead damage bonuses on stuff, so like that's like a weird conflict or confusing, so I'd want to like merge those in some way. Arca's always been about fucking you with random stuff while being fun, so if it's not fun, don't keep it, but it sounds like a fun feature. It's also in Valheim. Yeah, a lot of games inspired by like D&D have this sort of system. I think it could work. I worry about adding a complexity to the game that turns people away. We don't have to fully copy D&D here. Ray and I talked about this. We would just rename bludgeoning to blunt, slashing to slash, and piercing to pierce, right? It doesn't have to be overly complex, blunt slash pierce. That's very straightforward. Make it an option called the D&D RLCraft experience. Make a separate offshoot mod pack. Well, the idea was it could be hardcore only. Stop putting all the fun stuff behind hardcore. I just worry about changing up the formula, too much. It's worked for 5 years. RLCraft has how many? What are we at? 20 million something downloads. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So that's kind of like my mentality with that. I don't want to change the experience so much that like new players to RLCraft are getting a completely different experience than old players to RLCraft. I think the beauty with RLCraft and the updates that we've done is that the core has really remained the same, even from the initial explosion when it blew up in popularity. Like, we've obviously added a lot, changed a lot, but the core stuff has never really changed. And so this is one of the things I just worry about, like, is this kind of changing the core too much? Crap ton of balancing I smell. It would be a lot to kind of think about. I want it to make sense. Like I said, the skeleton example, right? I think that's a fair thing. Makes sense, right? Add a way to see mob resistance weakness. I agree with that for sure. Can you let us pet spiders? Think about working on Electro Blob's Wizardry. Will it get early mid-game work on mana usage? Yeah, I'd want to incorporate Electro Blob's Wizardry to the existing mana system that Trinkets of Baubles introduces. I don't want it to just become something you have to do, become like the meta. I want it to be kind of like a path that you can follow, but it's not going to be just immediately better than the current paths that we do have. Okay, here. Why is this extra complication needed? Feels weird and unnecessary. Just more browsing about mobs, resistances, and weapon damage types. It is realistic, I guess. That I also kind of understand, right? If I could do it in a way where, like Fonny said, it's more just makes sense and you don't really have to worry about it too much, I think it could be a cool extra layer.
You can argue the Spartan weapons are extra unnecessary complication, but the reason is it's called fun.
The reason is it's called fun. Yeah, Spartan weapons do this already a little bit.
Theoretically, we can also make it so certain enchants will inherently give you like a buff to a specific damage type.
I was thinking about that. Like, we could
edge giving necrotic on your weapon or something like that.
Right. Yeah, we could actually tie this in with enchantments as well. It's just, this would be a really big overhaul of things. Just a lot of work. I don't know if it's something I want to delay 2.10 for even more. Oh, I already know people would hate this. This conflicts with shield break too. The shields. He has the shield do 20% bludgeoning effectiveness, 50% piercing effectiveness, and 80% slashing effectiveness. And now this is kind of similar with the armors. The effectiveness means how much of a damage is it blocking. So it's like, if it was 100% piercing effectiveness, you would stop an arrow 100%. Because it's 50% piercing effectiveness, if an arrow does 2 damage, you're only blocking half that. So now the arrow does 1 damage, and your shield no longer completely blocks arrows, which I can already hear everybody screaming about. Would probably remove it from shields because we already have shields set up to work our own way. But I can show you, like, yeah, you can see I am blocking, but I am still taking damage. Yeah, which is funny because this is how 1.11 shields used to work. Shields in Minecraft, when they were first introduced, only blocked a percentage of damage. They never blocked full damage. And I was actually never really a fan of the change, which is why we did our shield break thing and reworked shields entirely. So I think it's fair to kind of not mess with shields because we
disable the whole shield thing.
Right, because we already kind of did. We already did our stuff with that. But RLCraft is gonna be Soulsborne. Yeah, this is the thing. I really don't want to lose that identity. I don't want to lose kind of like the Minecraft feel it has always had, because the whole point of RLCraft was to expand upon Minecraft. So I do worry that this could be like too much of a change. And then what somebody else said about making the mobs like semi-resistant, not overkill. The zombie right now is like too complicated for a vanilla zombie, right? I would probably remove all of this and just make the zombie do blunt damage. He's smacking you with his fists. I would just make zombies do blunt, and then the resistances would just be nothing. I don't think a zombie should even have any resistances. Except that the necrotic makes sense because it's already dead. And that is if we incorporate it with Electro Blob's wizardry. And this mod has existed since 2020. It's not even new. Fonny was saying is like, this is so underrated. This just needs more attention because of how incredibly well done this mod is. It's sick. It also has, let me pause my own music in the background here. It has, I think, the greatest music disc I have ever heard. Okay, guys? Called Yelp? I don't know. Just listen. Well, we have to add it now. How can we not add this mod now? Now it's drum and bass. It's actually drum and bass. And we're pretty sure the guy who made the mod made the song because he streams. And Fonny was looking through his past streams and he does do music production. So this is great. I think I've talked about it enough and I've explained it a good bit here that we can do a community poll. It's time to poll vote, guys. It's poll vote time. Would we want to see this into the base game, or do we want to see this in hardcore only, or do you think it doesn't fit RLCraft at all and don't add it? Future Voxy inserting myself into my own video. As this video goes up, I'm going to put up a community poll as well to get more opinions on this. Is this something you'd like to see in RLCraft? You think it fits, or do you think this is too much and doesn't really fit with RLCraft style? I'm still kind of on the fence about this, so I'd love to see other people's thoughts and opinions and what the community thinks of a feature like this. All right, 75% base game, 16% hardcore only, 9% doesn't even fit. All right, well, the people have spoken. The real Yelp. Wait a minute, is that the guy? Wait, authors, Yelp. Wait, it's the guy. Can we get a fat round of applause? All right, for the man, the myth, the legend. Dude, I want to say, and Fonny and I were talking about this, first of all, that it is essentially a crime that this mod is not more popular. This is so well done that I cannot believe it is not utilized more in packs. And like, it's only for 1.12. I mean, maybe that's part of the problem. There's not a lot of people left on 1.12. But, dude, this is so good. It's so good. And can I just say that this song is a banger, by the way. Did you make this song? I have a DJ show. I DJ drum and bass every Tuesday. I'm gonna DJ this next Tuesday. It's too good. The song's, dude, it's a banger. Absolute banger.